Wish you were one of those influencers with raving fans who binge on your every word, consume all your content, buy everything you have to sell, and demand even more? Then stay tuned while Authority Magazine columnist and BuzzFeed contributor Tracy Hazzard shares strategies, tips, and tactics from top videocasters, podcasters, authors, and social influencers on creating that bingeable factor. Now, let's join Tracy as she explores how to rise above all the digital noise with the binge factor.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Binge Factor. I'm Tracy Hazzard, and today I have Tonya Eberhart and Michael Carr here. Be Bold Branding Podcast. I love to talk branding because one of the things that I say so consistently in my business and when I'm advising podcasters starting out, keep that in mind, starting out, but even once you're established, my question to you is, who are you going to talk to? And how are you going to get that message across to them in a way that they're going to understand? How does that relate? And part of that is branding. Branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room. But it is also what you're putting out there because you're crafting that. So if you're not crafting that from the beginning, you're really not thinking about it. You're just haphazardly, pun intended on my last name, putting it out there. So Tonya Eberhart and Michael Carr are international best-selling authors. They're partners in Brandface and hosts of the Be Bold Branding Podcast, where they interview experts and entrepreneurs who have made one bold move that helped them gain differentiation and recognition in their space. Today, Be Bold Branding has more than 100 episodes and is the top 3 global rank in its category. Tonya and Michael have helped inspire podcasters, coaches, sales professionals, and creators in 5 countries and 45 states to attract more and convert more through the power of personal branding. Their mantra is, people don't do business with a logo. They do business with a person. So let's hear it from Tonya and Michael directly. Tonya and Michael, thank you so much for being here. And I love that I get to talk branding. I don't get to talk branding with many people. There are so few really great branding experts who I will let on the show. because you and I've talked about philosophy already, that like so much of branding is that logo focus. Like it's just all wrong.
Oh, amen to that.
Yeah. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your branding philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with this one. Our branding philosophy is really the story behind the brand, right? Mm-hmm. It truthfully is why you're doing what you're doing and who you're doing it for. So, and when we brand somebody, we really look at answering 5 critical questions that we believe every brand should answer. And everything else becomes this ecosystem around the answers to these 5 questions. It's first, exactly who do you serve? How do you serve them? What qualifies you to serve them? How does it make their life better? And what makes you different from everyone else also trying to serve that same customer?
Oh, I love that you said that. So for those of you who listen to a lot of the Binge Factor and possibly a lot of Feed Your Brand, you've heard me do my description exercise with you before, which is our way of writing 4,000 character descriptions. So I think I've said it, I don't know, and probably 20% of our episodes. So like you had to have heard this before. That is exactly the essence of it. We don't do it in 5 questions. We do it in 3, but it's the same question. It's the same things. We want to get across your personal story brand in your description of your podcast. So it's exactly the same model. I love that you do that. I love that those are the questions.
Well, we appreciate coming on and thank you for your kind words and letting us on, Tracy.
Absolutely.
Great. We love a meeting of the minds like this because we truly feel like so much out there is done wrong, right? But rather than focus on that, it's like, okay, what's the right way to do it?
Yes, exactly.
We feel like those 3, like your 3 questions, our 5 questions, like that approach also gives you a massive amount of focus, which is really, I've been an entrepreneur for 31 years. That's the problem with most people, no matter what industry they're in, right? Podcasting to lawn care is lack of focus on the growth of their business. When you dial your brand in, you get that focus. Like as part of the exercise, it just sort of comes peripherally with building that brand. That's why it's so much more than just a logo.
Exactly. It really is. So what's the story about you two starting a podcast? Like, how did that come about for you? And really it starts as a video cast because you're video first.
Yes. Well, here's a fun story for you, Tracy. So we started years ago, about
better than three.
I'd say closer to 4 years ago. And the reason we wanted to do this was to really put our clients at ease and let people know that those people that were intimidated by building a brand and they just really were not sure that that's what they wanted to do, not sure they really wanted to put themselves out there that much. We thought, you know what, we're going to do something called Fearless Friday, and we're going to show them why you should be fearless about this, because your brand is you and you should be proud of it. And the brand should be built to equal the great person that you are. And so we started that, but it was awful.
It was horrific.
I mean, it was so terrible. In fact, we took off all those old episodes where Michael's actually in the car and I'm in the office.
Yeah, I was on a phone in a parking lot on the road with a towel so to block out the sun. So I
which was like the old school podcasting thing. Like I remember in the early, it took me about a year where I was giving lectures constantly saying, you don't have to look like this. And it was a picture of a couple of guys in the car with their iPhones and the towel. Exactly. Or in the closet. That was the other one.
Was
the closet. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, you don't have to do this.
But we thought then, done is better than perfect, right? And back then there was really no such thing as this awesome big home studio when we first started. And or there was, but it wasn't mainstream like it is right now.
No, it was more of the we would speak at like the voiceover conference and things like that, where with those types of podcasting equipment were more prevalent at the time, especially with, voiceover work. Like when people were traveling, you could set up in your hotel room and stuff like that. And even then we didn't think about applying it to our podcast. We still were on our iPhones on a holder in the car. And, and then we realized, obviously, the things that so many other great podcasters figured out, like if you say Fearless Friday, you can only release on Friday effectively. You can only shoot on Friday. So okay, we got to make this non-time specific and help our listenership and stuff. So we changed a lot of things.
I love that about podcasting. It's one of my favorite things is to see how someone show shifted over time. And so I know you took, you deleted some of those episodes, which I actually don't encourage. I say, if people want to come back and find some of your Fearless Fridays, you should let them. You should let them. If they're going to consume that much of you backwards through the catalog, you should let them.
Well, we had some good ones. We did some hang gliding and things like that. So
the devoted listeners or the ones who really want the information will consume it and they won't care. They'll come along with you. But I love that you shifted it, because that's my favorite part about podcasting is how flexible it is. Absolutely. And so it flexes with your brand, because this is the one thing that I learned about branding all along, is that branding isn't a stake in the ground. It's not a line in the sand, right? I don't say this is my brand and it's done, because you're not done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's true, especially with a personal brand. You grow, like you are your brand. And what we like to say is a brand is an entire ecosystem. It's not just a photo, a logo, and a tagline. It's so much more than that. And you do evolve, might be a great word about for a brand. It evolves just like you change and evolve.
Well, it like Tonya said, it doesn't just change the way people see you. It changes the way you see yourself. And we're always a work in progress if we're doing the right things. And, I'm the abundant life broker. That is my tagline. That is my brand identifier. And it took me 27 years of business to figure out that's what I really was, and then, I'm able to live up to that, and it can mold and change with me. It'll never change. But the look, feel, and how that story progresses will definitely be updated.
Yeah, and I think also our business has changed too, right? And so we start out maybe a little more general, and then we narrow down our audiences. And one of the things that I think you have done so well is that you found that you work really well with real estate professionals, with home improvement, with entrepreneurs. Like those are your areas of niche in terms of personal branding. Is there a reason that you found that it works better in those areas?
Because that's who we are.
Yeah, and we went by default too. Like I didn't realize when I met Tonya. See, I had a real estate company, and I hired Tonya to be my marketer. She had a turnkey company at the time, and I thought I needed marketing, and she taught me I needed branding. I knew how to market. I had already been doing it for years and years and years, 2 decades worth. I was a senior vice president of a company that spent $20 million a year in advertising. I knew how to do it. I didn't realize what I needed was a brand. I also didn't realize she had written a book about it. And I didn't realize that she was putting me through that loop. Right. But so when all of that works so fantastically from a real estate company, and we still employ those principles to this day, now we do it with my other agents. She asked me to come on board and start what is Brand Face now today. So we naturally just went after real estate agents because I was so successful at it, and then my agents were so successful at it. We could just very easily show it to other people, and then we realized, of course, it's profitable. Those principles don't change no matter what you do, even podcasting, lawn care. It doesn't matter. Lawyers, doctors, auctioneers.
I think that it's so important that you're getting across who you are. And that's the part is that if there's not a match between who I am and my audience, then I'm going to spend a lot of time making phone calls, doing quotations, like doing things that are qualifying.
Yes.
But the right brand can already qualify you.
It sure
can.
can.
Absolutely.
Saves a ton of time. And that's what I think you've really hit on here in an industry area where, especially in real estate, I need to find trust quickly. I need to find authority quickly. I need to get something accomplished quickly if I'm going to hire a real estate professional. Like all of those things have to happen quickly. And there isn't much better way to do that than to express that both visually and in the languaging you're using in a brand. So you've got that dialed in. But I think this is the same thing that you probably applied in podcasting. Differentiation. Really making sure that you're bold and standing out. That's why you're called Be Bold branding, right? Like making sure that you're standing out for who you really are, for that story that you were talking about before. It's like, did you find it like there's so much of this, sameness going on in the podcasting?
Oh, we coined the term sea of sameness years ago, about a decade ago in the real estate world, right? That's where we first noticed it because that's where our focus was at the time. And of course, then, we realized, okay, we're coaches and creators, right? So that's who we should work with as well. And a lot of those people ended up being, podcasters, right? Because what's the greatest thing a coach or a creator can do is have their own podcast to express their expertise. So differentiation became, obviously was from the very beginning, that's really what we stand for is the differentiation. You've got to show how you're different from everyone else because better is subjective, different is inarguable.
Oh, that's such a good point. I think that this is a perfect time for me to hit on your binge factor. Actually, what I really found was so unique about your show is the languaging that you utilize, the advice that you give within your show, which is really unusual because a lot of times we get this same old model in podcasting where everybody's doing an interview and everybody's doing, or everybody's doing topics and they're running down a checklist of, I got to ask these questions and I've got to do it this way, but you never deviate from your key focus on who you're talking to. And so your questions that you ask, the topics that you choose are unique in and of themselves because they are focused at giving that unique listener the answer they need. And that focus is so hard to maintain in the podcasting industry. But it is serving, I guarantee you're serving your business well.
Yeah, that focus is hard to do in
I
like
was about
any
to say
part
that.
of business, period. It's so I just think that's the key. I think differentiation is the anchor, and then focus is the chain. Like it's got, you gotta have it in it, because if you don't, you're just gonna spin wheels or not get anywhere. And
Or you're doing too much, right? Like that's what I
oh
think is,
gosh.
yeah, you're doing too much. And we used to call it, like in design, I called it like the shotgun approach. Is like, I'd have clients who would want me to design hundreds of products. Like I literally designed over 800 office chairs in 3 years.
No,
And right. But if a client didn't ask for that, or one of their customers didn't ask for that, I could go in with 5 chairs, knowing which one exactly should be on that shelf, and I could get them to pick it. And if I could get them to do that really targeted, focused approach, that product would outsell the others tenfold.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
So
You know
true.
what the analogy is? Like, if anybody, if you listeners have kids, right? When our kids were tiny, you put them in a high chair, you put the bib on them. If you open up the can of peas, all our kids love peas, and you poured out the whole can of peas, they'd eat 3 peas. If you gave them 3 peas at a time, they'd eat the whole can. Like, and we're not any different as adults. We're not.
Too many is too many, right?
It is.
Right. I know. I love that. I love that thinking. I think that is really where the focus and refinement, and I call it curation a lot here, right? Curating our content, curating it to be right for our brand. And in being right for our brand, it's right for our listener. That's what you've done so well. That's your true binge factor. It's why I'm going to go back and listen to all your episodes, because I want to hear your advice. I think we need some new branding advice for podcasters. I think it's a different day and age. As you know, when you started, you were saying how like the technology was difficult. Like there was so much else to concentrate on. But now we have not only that sea of sameness that you referred to, which I love that term. That's a great term. The sea of sameness is there, but that sea of sameness is full of junk. It is full of podcasts that have pod faded. There's over 2.5 million shows and tens of millions of episodes, but 2.5 million shows, and only 300,000 of them are actively posting and providing advice and providing quality. So how do we brand ourselves and stand out differently today?
Well, I think first of all, if you can answer those 5 questions we talked about earlier, that puts you on the right path, because then you know who it is you're talking to. You can't be talking to everyone. You can't possibly be. So and when you know who it is you're talking to, then you take life experiences into play. Like for us, we've gone through hundreds of clients. So I know what their objections are. We know what they're thinking. We know their pain. We know their joy. So we ride that wave, right? So for instance, today on our solo topic, we're going to be talking about why branding should come first, right? And how everybody's
I'm so glad you said that.
Yes.
Please come first. Listen to them.
Please come first. Come first. Well, think about it this way, Tracy. If you don't know who it is you're talking to, how on earth you know where to market and what to put in your marketing? And your brand dictates who it is you're talking to, or the other way around. You can one can come before the other. But the point is, you need to know who that ideal customer is you're trying to draw in. And if you know that person, then content becomes so much easier. And I think a lot of people try to cram a lot of topics into one podcast when they should really just break it up one at a time and give them a P at a time, as Michael says, 3 Ps at a time. I think that's really important. And staying so focused on that. I know a lot of people with podcasts, and they'll just interview anyone.
Yeah, right.
And now, lucky for us, everyone has a story, right? So we can figure out, okay, what is your story? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about your brand. Why are you doing what you're doing, and who are you doing it for, and how's it changing their life? So some of those things are really important. But even at that, we don't interview everyone. We're very selective about that too, and getting even more selective as we move forward. Like you said, the ability to change is important.
Yeah, I agree with that brand first model. It's okay for a show to shift over time, for a brand to shift over time. We talked about that already. But if you don't have that focus of where you're starting from, you don't have an idea of who you're talking to. And so I think some of the most successful podcasts that I've heard had a vision in mind for who was listening on the other end, even if there was nobody there yet, right? Like they had this idea of who that listener was, and it comes across from the beginning of the show in a better way.
Agree. And, I think the focus of really, we're mass media, right? So we're on a podcast. Everybody wants to be Joe Rogan, right? We all want millions and millions of listeners. But the fact of the matter is every time we do a show, every podcaster should be talking to one person. Like you should be, because there might just be one person that needs it, right? And that one person is the one that matters. And then that one multiplies over time, but the focus works both ways, we believe. And so niching down to who you're talking to and then entering your podcast in a mindset that you're talking to that one person, I think it comes across better to people.
I think it does. I think it comes right across the mic in that intimacy and into the way the advice is. What I really think is we should segue into some of our 3 questions that we do with every guest that I have on the show here, because I think this is some of that thinking. So like, I've now got this focus of one listener. How do I grow it into more? What did you do that you thought was really successful for you and worked for you?
Well, we stayed focused on the things that we know people struggle with regard to branding. Okay, first of all, the biggest mistake people make is marketing before the brand is built. Right. And no wonder that happens, Tracy, because there are so many people out there these days that say, oh, don't worry about it. Your customer will decide what your brand is. Just do what you do. And we're going, oh my God, really? Right?
Yeah.
Please don't give them that advice, because the greatest thing you can do is influence how you want people to view you. Right.
Sure.
So, that's one thing you can do for sure.
Yeah, I think that's really critically important what you just said there, because too often I think that it's somebody who's selling you something prematurely that is telling you that advice, right? And so if you're not really if you don't really understand where that advice is coming from, then it's not working.
Yeah. And I think that you do have to, browbeat wouldn't be the right word, but it's like Tonya used to be in the radio business, and she'd say that, she'd sell an ad to people that would be their own voice or whatever. They're building their own brand, right? And then they'd come to her and they'd call her on the phone. They'd say, I'm tired of my commercial. Cut it off. I listen to this radio station too. I'm sick of hearing my voice. I said, I run the same thing over here. And she's like, no, that means if you're sick of it, the people you're trying to reach are just now listening to it. And so I think Tonya's right, sort of the repetitiveness of continually fighting with people like you to show the mass public what branding really is, because your business, our business, the branding business, we're competing with people all the time, like website builders. We'll build your brand. No, you won't. You'll help me build a website that my brand will be on. Right? You build websites, you don't build brands. And then that confuses the mass public, because they're like, oh, well, I have a website, I have a brand. Oh, I have a logo, I have a brand. Oh, I have a tagline, I have a brand. No, those are just parts of your ecosystem that you haven't even started on yet. And I think it's easier for those of us that can stay focused on that, because we're still defining that. We're still hammering that into people. That is the definition.
Right. And I think that's the major listener growth strategy that you've hit on right there, is that consistency and constancy, right? If you are doing that again and again and again, and you're not deviating from your brand message, then it's gonna come across, and at some point it's gonna hit that story. Like right there, that SEO, oh my gosh, how many website SEO companies sell a website build with zero branding experience, right? And they say they'll put a brand on it. But when I actually go back, if you actually did, and people don't do this, but they should, check their references, you'd see that every single website looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And we noticed that, first of all, in the real estate genre, right? But it's really no different from any other genre.
No, it's not.
They all look the same. And they don't realize it, because they're looking at their own and they're like, oh, I have a website. Look, I'm up. Right. Like they don't really look at it, because they're not in a housing complex where every house looks exactly the same, right? They're not looking at them next to each other. And that website builders is counting on that. that you won't ever see that. You won't ever notice. But that's happened to us. That's actually why we ended up building websites in our business. We don't really build them often, but if somebody has a brand, they have to have a brand or we won't do it. But if they have a brand and their website just isn't functioning, we'll fix it for them. And we started doing that because what we found is that there were so many people that had non-functioning sites because someone would build it and it would look pretty. But they were all the same. And so we started getting people coming to us and we were like, do you realize that your website is exactly the same as these 10 speakers or these 10 real estate professionals? They're all exactly the same structure. That's the same. They're the same. They have the same weaknesses. So it made us easy to do our job. But I was like, you guys got to fix your look. And it was a problem. But this is the case of, you can see why that website builder sells them that. Because otherwise they're going to be waiting months for them to go find a branding expert, go get it branded or go figure it out themselves. And they won't.
And then they won't. That's the key.
Right. But most of the time, the truth is most people don't understand there's a big divide between branding and marketing. They just don't, they see it all as encompassed into one thing. So when somebody says, we'll brand yourself through video, brand yourself through this, they're selling a marketing tool. They're not selling a brand.
Well, that happened recently. I just saw that as like somebody did trailer videos and they looked so amazing and they were super professional and there was branding involved in it. At least that's what everybody was told. And then now that so much of the same group has gotten them, there's probably about 20 in the group who has them. And we have a group of about 150. Everyone realizes when they watch the video that they're exactly the same.
It's the same.
Yeah. And everyone realizes it. And so it's like, it only hurts you at the end of the day, right? It only hurts you. So it's going to hurt your listener growth. It's going to hurt your business growth. It's going to hurt growth in general. And so the best way is to stay true to who you are, stay true to that brand, and stay true to that listener. Right?
Yes.
That's what you're really getting at.
Yes.
Let's talk about guesting, because guesting has a significant growth factor for your show as well, right? We all want guests because we hope guests are going to bring more of the targeted audience to us. So what do you do to really select a good guest and make sure, because I know you're really selective about it and you've gotten even more selective going forward. So tell everybody about your criteria here.
Well, if I could start before you,
absolutely.
Like, if I could answer a question that wasn't asked, we learned the hard way, because we've been podcasting long enough. There was no dating match platforms and things like that. Like, we literally had an intern calling people, sending emails, sending letters, typed letters, like anything we could to try to get on any kind of show that we possibly could get on, and attempting to get that in there because we recognized that we could come and talk to people that was a direct correlation to our ideal customer because they had that listenership. And so, but then thank goodness, people like Alex Sanfilippo and have come up with great ways for us to be able to do that. And I'll let Tonya pick up on that now, because then that just opened up a Pandora's box.
Well, it opened up the podcast swap, which we love, right? Where you go on my show, I go on your show, right? Like, we love the podcast swap because we both have listeners, so it works out great, right? But going beyond that into the guests that you invite on your show, like, that selectiveness has now come out for you as well, right?
It had to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things, and this might be a little bit edgy, but a couple of things are, we want to invite people on that could be our ideal customer too, because they have a story to share, and yet their story may not be defined, developed, and displayed correctly, which is what we're known for, right? So we have the opportunity to showcase their story, and then also talk to them about going through our program and becoming a brand face. The other thing is, we want to make sure that we have somebody with a dialed in story. They may not have the brand out there and fully developed and displayed correctly yet, but they do have a very intriguing, unique story where it all begins. And that's what we want to, we want to pay attention to. We really don't care if they have 500,000 or 5 million social media followers. That's great. Of course, if you're looking, if all you want to do with podcasting is just make sure that you get your face out in front of as many people as possible, but that's not really what it's about for us. We want our face in front of the right people.
Mhm.
So there are, that's one of the characteristics we look at is could they be a customer? And the other is, do they have a very compelling story, whether or not it's built out yet?
Mhm.
Right, because you've got to hold true to the lessons that you're bringing to your show. And so
Absolutely.
that's that curation that you're doing so well.
And
You
Yeah.
talk about, go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to say, like, one of those criteria is very important, that our ideal customers on that listenership, right? Because that's, when in marketing overall, people say newspaper's dead. We say newspaper is not dead if your customer is reading the newspaper, right? And so your brand needs to be on the newspaper if your customer is reading that newspaper. And we follow that same very finite principle on podcasting too. So we really pay attention to who's listening to their show, because if it's a car mechanic, we can help him with branding probably, or her with branding, but we're not talking to the ideal customer at the end of that day. We want to talk to entrepreneurs, coaches, speakers, podcasters, authors, and real estate agents, so we try to make sure.
It's so funny. We talked to a real estate videocaster, I'm going to call, because they're not a podcaster right now. They call themselves a podcaster, but they have no podcast show, right? It's all video. And we're trying to talk to them about like why they haven't syndicated it properly as a podcast. And it's because they believe the audience only watches. And I said, and so it came down to the fact that they only watch.
Yes.
Oh, and I was like,
point.
Do you really understand that I know for a fact in the real estate industry that radio ads still do tremendously well to drive traffic to real estate professionals? Mm-hmm. Radio ads.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Old school radio.
I do radio on 3 different radio stations. Yeah.
Right. I've got some groups that do, real estate groups, right? Like, the REIs. And so they have all of those going on, and they still advertise for their group on radio, right? Yeah. So I was like, you're missing a whole segment of the audience because you're thinking only about what you like.
Exactly. And how many people, even if it is a video type video cast or whatever, but they're just listening to it. I do it all the time in the car. I'm not watching it. I'm driving. Right. But I'm listening to it. Right. So
and so there's such a power in being in all those formats, right?
Yes. You need to be on a true podcast platform where you're just listening, because so many people just listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk about profitability before we go here. And you talk about profitable for personal brands, and I like to talk about profitable podcasting. Now, the traditional model is, what's my return on investment? And people think, it's going to be ads. And I can say less than 1% of all my guests will ever say ads. It's just never going to be the case here. But when you look at your podcasting, and at this time of year, because we're starting out 2023 together as we're doing this interview, although it'll air in a month or two. And I always look at what was my return on investment from the past year. So let's reflect on that. What was the return on investment from podcasting for you? And do you see it as part of your profitability for your personal brand?
Yeah. Podcasting brought us probably 60% of our business last year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it was in various different forms as well. So through podcasting, we've met collaboration partners. Alex Sanfilippo would be one of those. We got some clients from doing a collaboration webinar with him after we met him through podcasting. We did that with several other people as well. So that's one way we've utilized podcasting to meet the right people like that. We've also had several of our guests become our clients, and several hosts become our clients. And then the other thing is we are exploring right now sponsorships, and not your typical, ad buying, because that's pennies on the dollar, guys. Right. I used to be in the media world when internet ads first came out. It was like, oh, well, how many impressions does that ad get? And I'm thinking, you are barking up the wrong tree. This has nothing to do with it, right? Same thing in podcasting. don't go for the pennies on the dollar kind of, groupings, what would we say, bundle aggregates and so forth. Look for people that actually are going to be an asset. In other words, what we look for in a partner is, okay, what things might our clients need next after their brand is built? Do they need a social media company? Do they need a videography company? Do they need a website company? Those are the people that we look for to become partners and sponsorship partners for our podcast. So there's just a few ways that podcasting has brought us money and made it profitable for us.
Absolutely. Well, good. I'm so glad to hear that 60%. I mean, this is what I think people
Huge.
really underestimate the power of it. And the other thing that I think most people don't look at from a return on investment, but I bet you found this to be the case, is that selling branding is hard, right? Selling branding is hard because it's a little bit
ethereal.
Yeah, it's ethereal, right? It's unknown. There's lots of unknowns in the process. I bet you have less conversations than you used to have with prospective clients because of the podcast.
Yeah.
No question about it. It educates people. And now when our staff gets on sales calls with those people, they'll say, oh yes, I know my logo's not my brand, right? They'll say things like that. I know that a tagline and my photo and my logo, they're not my brand. I realize it's a lot more than that. It's like, okay, we're off to a good start.
Right. We don't have to go for education. We can go for the opportunity, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly right.
Oh, wonderful. Well, every year I think about shifting my show. I think about what's next for it. What's next for your show?
Well, I don't know. That's a good question, because actually, if you'd asked me this last year, I would have said, okay, we're going to end up doing one guest and one solo, which we have. And that's actually just been working so well for us that I think we're going to stay on that bend. But one thing that you pointed out kindly as we started this and we're in the process of is getting on Spotify and some of the other platforms that we're not on yet. And that's just simply out of just lack of time. Sometimes you just get so busy and those things have to be done. But when we first started, we started on a video only kind of platform. We just literally talked about that. Wasn't necessarily because we just watched video. It was, okay, we're going to do this because it's different. Right? Because at the time, everybody was doing audio and we thought, they'll zig right, we'll zig left, right? And we did. And then before you know it, so much time passes and we've missed huge opportunities on the audio only platforms. So there you go. We're still learning and evolving too.
It's always a work in progress, but I love the fact that you ask about the ROI because that's so important. And I would tell your listenership, know your numbers and keep up with them, because that is where your real growth is going to come from. When you look back and you say, this came from this, this came from this, this came from this, I need to tweak this, I don't need to mess with that. That's when you really start to scale. So.
Well, and not getting caught up though in the vanity of the numbers, like, oh my gosh, I have 100,000 listeners. Like, any of that doesn't matter, because look, if you're speaking to a room of 50 people each week, that's 50 people.
That's huge.
I can't get on the phone with that many in a week, right?
Huge.
It's still way more than I can do one-on-one. And so it's still better.
Amen. It is. If you could get 50 people to listen to what you're saying, that's an incredible sales opportunity every time. So don't get caught up on the big numbers. Get caught up on the right numbers.
On the right numbers, the growth factor, the what's working, which ones are resonating, which ones are they? I love that when people quote you back to you, right? Like that's what they're saying. I know this. I've heard you say this, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing, right? You have them. The sale is done.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And, one of the things we like to say about the right type of clients is, people don't just need to know that you exist. The right people need to know why you exist. And that goes from, way back in my media days when people said, well, I have 50,000 impressions on that ad. And I thought, I don't want to impress 50,000 people. I want to talk to 50 who want to buy.
Yes.
That's right. I love that. Well, thank you both, Michael and Tonya, for bringing Be Bold branding to the market and brand face principles to entrepreneurs everywhere.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us on.
Tonya and Michael bring up such great points about the way we're thinking about our brand, the way we think about how we're personally outreaching our audience. Like every part of those 5 questions that they have are so critical in the process of thinking things through. But I don't want you to get bogged down by this idea that the brand needs to come first. Brand thinking definitely needs to come first, right? Because that's the model that you're going to go after. It doesn't mean it can't shift. And I love that we talked about that because you don't stay static. Your clients aren't going to stay static. Your business isn't going to stay static. And your podcast is definitely not going to stay static. It's a dynamic thing in and of itself. And to be able to test out and flex your branding through your podcast is a fabulous thing. I just talked to a longtime client. He's got over 500 episodes, probably close to 600 by now. He's been a client for over 3 years. And he said to me just yesterday that his podcast is going to shift for the next year. And he's going to be focused more on solo episodes and doing things that are really deeply dived into the niche of his show. And that's a huge departure from where he was a year ago or 2 years ago. And that's okay. The model of your business, the model of your brand can shift over time, but your podcast could be a great testing ground for the brand perception resonance. So this is something that I say, and this is in addition to, and I'm very, very sure Tonya and Michael will agree with this, but we can put what we want out there and craft our brand in the way that we think is absolutely perfect. It's just the right way we want to be perceived. But that doesn't mean it's going to be received on the other end. Brand is completely perception, and it is on us to make sure that we're testing that it's being received as we intended it. And there's no better way to do that than to have an engagement, to have a dialogue. And your podcast is a great way to test that out in a really simple and easy way at which you can shift it the next time you go and record. So it's a great place for you to test all of those brand ideas you have. So keep your podcast moving, take some advice from Tonya and Michael and the Be Bold Branding podcast and go listen to some of their ideas out there because the concepts that they're talking about and the way they talk about branding is essential to the development of your podcast. So until next time, I'm Tracy Hazzard here at the Binge Factor, and I'll be back with another concept, another podcaster, and another way to look at the brand you're building and the messages you're creating in podcasting.
You've been listening to the Binge Factor podcast. For more information on podcasting and videocasting success tips and tactics, please go to thebingefactor.com. And be sure to listen to our other show for podcasters called Feed Your Brand. If you'd like to be interviewed on this show, as well as featured in Tracy's column, please go to thebingefactor.com/guest and apply.